It's October 5th, 2023 today. Welcome to Axiom News Live, where every Thursday we engage strengths to catalyze change. Here we start with what's strong rather than what's wrong and lift up the stories of people whose work in the world we've become connected to and care about. I'm your host, Peter Pula, and I'll be co-hosting today with Sean Loney. Our guests today are the Right Reverend Dr. Carmen Lansdowne, elected 44th moderator of the United Church of Canada, and Niamh O'Sullivan. Niamh is with Bisocial Canada, an organization I've been in relationship with for a number of years now. Bisocial Canada is catalyzing fundamental shifts towards a social value marketplace. So that, I'll invite Sean Loney, my friendly co-host, to join us in the stream. And Sean, you've got news on your mind. So what's news, brother?
Hey, Peter. Nice to see you again. This the most hopeful 1 hour on the internet. I'm always look forward to Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern to connect with you. We had an election here in Manitoba, and as been in the national news, elected Canada's first First Nations premier. And 2 days into his premier-elect position, he was at a Indigenous conference this morning teaching, talking to and singing for and praying with 1,000 teachers from around the province. And in his victory speech, he said, look, young Nietzsche's, young Indigenous folks, we'll make a deal. If you take your first step, our government will be there with a job and a training program for you to, as he said in Ojibwe, achieve your vision. And so it feels like a new day here in Manitoba.
Right on.
And we're pretty proud with what Manitobans accomplished on Tuesday.
Beautiful. All right. Well, with that, why don't we bring in Carmen and Niamh to join us in the stream, and we'll what we've been in the habit of doing in the last little while is just connecting and weaving community together by way of our relationships. So it would be really great to hear, Carmen, from you and from you, Niamh, how it is that relationally we find ourselves here in a room together at this particular time. Carmen, how is it that we find ourselves meeting and in relationship now?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I currently have the pleasure of serving as the 44th moderator of the United Church of Canada. And I was elected last summer in July of 2022 and was installed in August. And every moderator brings their own sort of perspective, I guess, to the role. The moderator is the spiritual leader for an elected term of the United Church of Canada, is the primary public spokesperson, and then also chairs the governing bodies, so our general council executive. And so I have an advisory committee, and we sat together last August and said, okay, like, what is Carmen, the moderator, best placed to do in the world and in Canada over the next 3 years? And so we focused on engaging in change-making conversations across the country, both inside and outside of the church, broadening what engagement looks like inside and outside of the church, and then mentoring a new generation of leadership. And that's really what I've been doing for the last year. I developed with some friends a workshop that it has nothing to do with the church. I'm doing a version of it in the church, but we envisioned having some conversation. It kind of brings in some futurist work from Jane McGonigal's book Imaginable, some ideas around flourishing, and some of the discussions that are happening at Harvard and Baylor, Humanity 2.0 at the Vatican, about how can we measure human flourishing and work towards a future where we can all flourish. And as we were planning this workshop, we envisioned having a keynote speaker to kind of have like a presentation and then a fireside chat with me that's open to the general public, this public workshop, sort of envisioning what does a future flourishing Canada look like.
Right.
And one of my colleagues said, oh, in Winnipeg, you have to ask this guy, Sean Loney. And he wrote this book called Army of Problem Solvers, and I really want to read it. And so I picked up the book and I was like, this is amazing. And so I wrote to Sean and I said, hi, I'm the moderator of the United Church of Canada, and I was wondering if you would be willing to give a keynote when I do this event. And in Winnipeg. And he was like, I know who you are. So
All right.
I was in Winnipeg for something else. We met, we hit it off. And so we're really excited that when we come back next March to Winnipeg to do this workshop, that Sean's going to be our keynote speaker.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. So more weaving happening there. All right. And Niamh, I think we crossed paths maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago.
No, I remember. So I've worked for Bisocial Canada for 3 years. I'm now the manager of social enterprise and community benefits. But I remember meeting you maybe 1 month into working at Bisocial Canada, because at the time, our founder, David LePage, had just released The Marketplace Revolution, his book.
Right. Yes.
To help us with some generative journalism, with a bunch of, I think, podcasts and lots of webinars to promote the book and promote the concept of a social value marketplace. So that's I was just thinking about that. That's when we first met.
Well, all right, 3 years ago. Beautiful. And lots of remarkable things have been happening. We've been tracking with Bisocial, and the work that you and your colleagues are doing is extraordinary. Definitely shifting. We were using the phrase marketplace revolution at that time. So if we're still thinking in revolutionary terms, I'd say we're moving at least in evolutionary directions. So great stuff is happening there. So with that, Sean, why don't our habit is to spend a little bit of time focusing first on the work of one guest and then another. So why don't we step into the three of us bearing witness to and presencing the work that Carmen is doing. It's your relationship, Carmen and Sean, that have brought us together. Sean, why don't we begin with why you felt it was important to invite Carmen to join us today?
Well, as Carmen was saying, we met at the Social Enterprise Center a few months ago and realized we were each other's people in many ways and could see the world in an optimistic fashion. The United Church, I am a proud member of the United Church, and in many ways it radicalized me as a young person, and even still presently, about thinking in an inclusive manner. The United Church is
so you're a good sort of radical, Sean.
Yes, absolutely.
Go to church and be radicalized and be like Sean.
And then Carmen is a wonderful, spiritual leader and spokesperson for the church, and fits well into our goal here, Peter, is to having guests that are creating the world in which we want to inhabit. Mm-hmm. And Carmen, I guess I'd just ask, what are you most excited about in your work these days? What's getting you out of bed in the morning?
I just did my very first flourishing workshop with 70 people in the church, and it was really well received. So where was that? In Winnipeg.
At Meadowood,
the center of the universe, Winnipeg these days.
Yeah, it was at the United Church in Meadowood. We had 70 people from Winnipeg and surrounding areas that came out and spent the day with me. We spent the morning sort of like talking about different models of flourishing, and we talked about brain science and like how the limbic system works. And when we have, our bodies have not evolved to tell the difference between like an actual physical threat and like a social threat or a threat to our stability. And that when we react out of a place of perceived threat, that we automatically become a little bit like closed down and not as creative. And so we spent some time exploring that. And then also this futurist work that I mentioned by Jane McGonigal, who works at the Institute for the Future in Southern California. And so the first part of the morning was just spending a lot of time talking about flourishing, what's working, what's not working in people's lives. But in the afternoon, it got really practical. Like, imagine the future that you want. If you could imagine a flourishing Canada or a flourishing congregation 10 years from now, what that look like. Now, also imagine like, what's the worst case scenario? What's the shadow future that you can imagine? And I think the two most important questions that we ask in this workshop, and it was really designed for the general public, and then we sort of churchified it afterwards, was, if you imagine that positive future, what are the things that you can do today that you would be proud of to contribute to that future that you want to see. And on the flip side, when you imagine the shadow future, what are the things that you can do today, the actions you can take today that you can be proud of that would help to prevent that future? And I was happy and grateful that people were so engaged. Like all of the times that we had for small group, there wasn't any awkward like hemming and hawing or like, okay, we're done now and looking at the facilitator. Like people were really engaged, having a conversation. We've just started getting back evaluations and folks found it really helpful. We have a like 45-page workbook that participants can take away with them. And we go through about 2/3 of it in the actual workshop, but then there's pages for afterwards. There's places you can set up like accountability buddies. So you make connections with people that might not have been part of your world that you're going to check in with about the things that you came up with in the workshop. And it was, people left inspired and excited about continuing to discern and mull over, like, what is it that I want to be an active participant in?
So you're touring across the country. What are some of the other cities you're going to be in, or other locations, and where can we find more information so that we can invite Canadians to attend?
Yeah, so wecanflourish.ca is a website that we made that just makes all of the public events easy to find for Canadians. Our next events are in Kingston the week before Remembrance Day. So Andrew Winston is going to be the keynote speaker. He co-authored with Paul Pullman a book called Net Positive: How companies who give back more than they take can thrive. And Paul Pullman's the CEO of Unilever. So and I've heard Andrew speak before. He's a really engaging speaker. He's worked in ESG space and green transition consulting with some of the bigger transnational companies in the States for a long time. That'll be in Kingston on November 9th. And then we'll take a break as people get busy over the winter and the holidays. We're in Vancouver in February. We're still trying to nail down dates because we had originally chose dates that competed with the BC Home and Garden Show, and like the whole city was sold out. And then we're back.
Lesson learned: don't compete with the BC Home and Garden Show.
I know, right? And then March 14th, we're back in Winnipeg to do the public events, and then April we're in Halifax. And I forget after that, but we're going to St. John's, Newfoundland, St. John, New Brunswick, Sault Ste. Marie. Sault Ste. Marie's in May of next year. We're doing Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, Saskatoon. So
sounds
really
like a fantastic thing for people to connect. I think Canadians in general have a high opinion of the United Church of Canada in terms of the positions that the church has taken over the years. But membership's on a decline. It's a national trend. I loved how you expressed that if you're kind of seeing as a threat, you're going to respond in a different way. I often encourage people to look at underutilized church buildings, not as a problem, but an opportunity.
Totally.
But when it comes to church work or the church in general, in the midst of the traditional membership decline, what are you excited about? Like, what's buzzing for the church in the United Church these days?
I know the United Church in BC the best, so I'll talk about a couple of things. Where I worked before I became moderator at First United Church Community Ministry Society is really an outreach ministry now that works almost solely with those experiencing houselessness, substance use disorders, entrenched poverty. So we had it used to be 50 now. It used to be 60 now. It's a 50-bed homeless shelter, low barrier homeless shelter. We have a help desk where people can come for socks, like clean socks, clean underwear, harm reduction supplies, dog food, referrals to different things, toiletries. We have a community volunteer income tax program. We have a legal aid clinic. We have spiritual care. We have a food truck because we just launched last year a $37 million capital campaign to redevelop the site of First United on the corner of Hastings and Gore in the downtown east side. And there'll be another 54. So it'll be an 11-story building. Another $54 million has been completely pledged by the federal and provincial governments to support 103 units of secured non-market Indigenous rental housing. And then there'll be 4 floors of church as the pedestal of the building. So that feels like a real creative and exciting expression of how to be church in the world in a way that's not focused on Sunday worship. But not that there's anything wrong with Sunday worship, but it's in a way, First United is a way of like practicing the things that we're preaching about in terms of caring for the least of these. We have a new church plant called Feast and Fallow, which is a plant-based cafe at the site of Oak Ridge United Church in sort of in the Canby corridor area. And so it's a social enterprise that does plant-based food and plant-based like specialty coffees. But they also are like doing community building and making space for people to talk about the intersections of faith, the environment, and their bodies. And so how, like, where does the food that we eat come from, and how does it nourish us, and how is that connected to spirituality? So I think that's a really exciting thing. There's a reinvigoration of Five Oaks Retreat Center in Paris, Ontario, that I find really exciting. There's a longtime lay leader and designated lay minister named Michael Schuberg, and he joined just before the pandemic as the new executive director, and he's sort of trying to affect a turnaround like the one we did at First United. And then in the Atlantic provinces, I think they're really on the cutting edge of finding creative ways to respond to the declining membership in churches, and how small rural churches in less populated areas can come together to still provide the parts of community and church that they have appreciated in the past in a new way that doesn't rely on a single paid accountable ministry personnel. And they're getting really creative there, and that's hopeful to see too. There's a church in Nova Scotia, Orchard Valley United Church in New Minas, that did a $2 million renovation of their building, which in rural Canada, that's like a massive undertaking. And they worshipped in the old Sears at the strip mall for a couple of years while they did that. And they had like community free yoga. They did a foot care station and worked with the health authority to hire nurses to do drop-in foot care for seniors, which also provides a point of social connection. It's not just about having foot care. As you age, you have a harder time cutting your nails and things like that. And it's a good, if people's feet are not doing well, then the nurses can make a referral for them to go check in with a primary health provider. So there's a lot of interesting and exciting things happening around the country.
Go ahead, Peter.
I just want to pull on the thread a little bit. When Sean first asked what's most alive in your work, you mentioned the We Can Flourish events, and some of the stories you've just told are very place-based, and yet it sounds like this tour that you're on, it has the capacity to sort of weave some continuity, or to weave a fabric of a community across the country. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to say a little bit more about why that particular series of conversations is so important to you. When you were speaking of it, you were very animated. It strikes me that there's something very alive in that for you and with you.
Yeah, I think for good or for ill, I always seem to be focused, like not on a 3-year plan, not on a 5-year plan, like barely on a 10-year plan, but thinking through like, what are the possibilities for my future? And, the church, but also a lot of our institutions in Canada are legacy institutions that are not responding well to the current needs of Canadians. And so I feel really passionate about engaging in change-making conversations around, things like procurement and how that can help us to live out our values better. So it's good to have Niamh join this session as well. But like, how can we? I really get excited about macroeconomics, and so there's 2 books that I've read in the past couple of years that are inspiring me. One is Kate Rayworth's Donut Economics, and she talks about how that traditional machine that we learn about in like economics 101, about we have inputs and outputs and things kind of go through the machinations of the
I didn't
economy.
finish economics 101 myself.
Yeah,
so.
it's gross.
No.
So she talks about how instead of thinking about a machine, we could think about it as a donut, which is also like not an inspiring model. But we have these social foundations that we agree to, like our education systems, democracy, social contracts that we have with each other, social safety nets, those sorts of things. And then on the outside of the donut would be our planetary boundaries. And so anytime that we have a collapse of our social foundations or we exceed our planetary boundaries, we're putting people or the planet or both in danger. And so we want to strive to be inside the cake part of the donut in this just and safe center for humankind. And I was really inspired by that, because I think that when we, and Mariana Mazzucato is the other economist that I like. She's an Italian economist teaching in London, and she talks about how when we set goals, we're much more creative than when we try to solve problems. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of Canadian public policy right now is focused on problem solving and not on like, what's the Canada we want to be? And so I like this combining of all my passions to like be very forward thinking, future thinking, in making decisions that are grounded in our ethics, but doing it in a goal setting space instead of a problem solving space.
Beautiful. I love it.
In some ways, Carmen, we met engaging around social enterprises. You're the first First Nations woman to lead a major faith denomination in Canada. Talk a bit about the church and social enterprise and your relationship and why you're excited about social enterprises becoming part of the mainstream economy in Canada.
I think partly because social enterprises think about the connections of all those things, right? Like business as usual in a way that is founded on this education of neoclassical economics and that trickle down economics that, you know, as the industrialists or the capitalists get richer, that's going to benefit everybody. We have like almost 100 years of data to show that is not true. And that traditional machine model is where the idea of externalities came from, right? Like that there's certain things that can't go through the machine. And so we just like leave those out of the equation. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about social venture, social impact, social profit spaces is that, you know, we see those externalities and we try to bring them back into our field of view and saying we can't continue to make business decisions that exclude people on the planet. And I think that the church, as it needs to re-envision how it works in the world and what its presence looks like and what's meaningful to people, you know, I think deep spirituality can be grounded in worship, but also can be grounded in making the world the place that we want to see based on our faith convictions. And so there's opportunities for the church, as we're no longer sustainable on the model that we used to be, to really imagine, okay, what are the things that can help people connect the impact that they can have in their lives with their faith and their spirituality. So that's why it's important to me from a church perspective. I'm really grateful to have been elected as moderator. I didn't necessarily, it wasn't never my goal to do that. And in some ways it's been really hard. It's hard to move from being the boss to being a figurehead and spokesperson. I have to catch myself like not wanting to micromanage other things that are happening in the church all the time.
It's a learning edge then.
Yeah. But I also think that, you know, we have really strong Indigenous ministries and justice like programs happening across the country. And we have mostly rural Indigenous communities of faith. And although I'm Indigenous, I've never worked in that context. And I think that me being moderator for the whole church is sort of a testament to the fact that Indigenous people are not only concerned with Indigenous people. And this is one of the things that you know, to bring it back to your good news story about the new premier of Manitoba, somebody I had posted about the election on LinkedIn, and then somebody said, this will be great because he can like really respond to Indigenous needs in Manitoba. And I said, well, maybe, but like, I think it was really smart to focus on healthcare, because so many of the social determinants of health are things that need addressing in Indigenous communities. But I also think it's important for Canadians to see that Indigenous leadership can operate and have a mandate to care for all Canadians, right? That we're not single issue leaders. And that's the thing that I'm really hopeful about, despite the fact that Wabkanu is an Indigenous man, that his campaign wasn't focused on his indigeneity, but on his vision for Manitoba. And I think that that's why my focus is on flourishing in Canada and not reconciliation.
Interesting. So we got a couple more minutes. I'm wondering, Carmen, what is it that you'd like to see happen next?
Well, obviously, we want people to come and hear our keynote speakers.
There we go. Right? Straightforward, isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. But I mean, not everybody's going to be able to take a day off work to come and hang out and have these dreaming workshops with me. But
That's
I
fair,
think, if I have a wish for Canadians, it's that we become more. We take the time out to dream about what it is that we want, right? When we look at all of the political and divisive stuff that's happening, the partisan and divisive stuff that's happening across the country right now, whether it's about the gender affirming policies in schools or, the Freedom Convoy and public health mandates, like all of that comes from perceived threat. Right. Mm-hmm. And we're in a space where we have like huge existential threats that we're worried about all the time. And sometimes just taking a moment to say like, oh, I'm really scared, or, oh, I'm in a place of reaction, actually engages your prefrontal cortex in a way that brings you back into an executive functioning space where you can start to be a little bit more creative. Like simply the acknowledgement of this stresses me out, or I'm experiencing eco grief, or I'm really scared about my trans kids' safety at school, or I don't know what this means to call kids by different gendered pronouns. And that feels really unsettling for me. Like all of it is just responding out of fear. And so I really have a goal for Canada, both inside and outside of the church, to engage in conversations about like leaving some of that behind and saying, what is the society that we want to create? Because we're kind of crumbling and have this also very subtle, like pulling in other residents into Canada through immigration and not making space for them, not recognizing their education. We need the bodies, but we don't want to like disrupt the social fabric of Canada as the way that we've understood it as a very like WASPy G7 country. And so like we're
Some
also
people have understood it that way.
We're not really making space for new Canadians to flourish in our country either. And I think we need to make that more explicit and say, what does our future look like and how do we work towards it?
Beautiful. Well, it sounds like you've all come to the right place. Start with what's strong rather than what's wrong. Develop a generative image of the future and find where that matches your intention and live into your gifts and life-giving experiences. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll close that part of our conversation. Carmen, thank you very much. I think the idea with these 20-minute segments is just to catch in on what the latest is. And I think we got a pretty good view of many of the things that are happening in your world and in your purview. So that's brilliant. But in the meantime, I think it would be very easy to speak for a much longer period of time and unfold all this. So thank you for the time you've given us so far. We'll take 60 seconds now just to offer an invitation to Cultivating Community, our fortnightly feast for the soul, which might sound a bit like what's happening at We Can Flourish. And then we'll come back and we'll spend some time. I can't believe it, but here we are talking about economics again. And we'll do some more with Niamh after the short break.
If you would like to experience genuine connection with others, being heard, patience, levity and laughter, warmth, light, smiles, new, deepening, and healing relationships, then cultivate community with us. Coined by participants as a fortnightly feast for the soul, these 90-minute gatherings hosted by Axiom News offer a weaving of small group dialogue led by carefully crafted questions, followed by light, whole group reflection. Each dialogue round deepens connection and enlivens possibility between and amongst those who participate. All are welcome. Learn more and RSVP for our next gathering by visiting the Events tab in A New Commons, our sister initiative in Mighty Networks, at anewcommons.mn.co/events.
It's funny, Sean, we've done, what, 6 or 8 episodes now?
You keep saying that. You've been stuck on 6
I told
or 8.
you I was going to keep saying it. And every time I see that ad, I get a tear in my eyes. So I don't know. Here, Yvonne, for beautifully putting that together.
Wonderful.
Niamh
And
O'Sullivan
welcome,
from
Niamh.
Bisocial Canada. Yep, welcome. It's good to have you here. So I said earlier, we, in the background to all of this, we're sort of sorting out as a group what our themes are, so we can be clear about these. And I thought with your coming, Carmen, we might be able to say that there's a new theme developing on the place of faith. But then you took us back to economics. So here we are talking about, we've had community bonds, social finance, community benefit agreements. We've had a couple of visitors from your crew, Niamh, to talk about social procurement. But I understand Bisocial just keeps on moving. How long ago was it started?
It's going to be our 10-year anniversary next year.
I thought it was something like that. Yeah, because I met David at a conference, and he was telling me what he was up to, and I thought, that just sounds like the most boring thing in the world. But since then, and here we are talking economics, and since then, tremendous policy shifts have changed in both cities, corporations, and even the federal government. So the work that you guys are doing is really rocking a shift. So what piece of it are you bringing to us today? What is it that's most alive for you in the work that you're doing with Bisocial, or anywhere else for that matter? Like what's working in your world?
Exactly what you said. Social procurement. There's so much demand for social procurement happening over the last 4 years. How many municipalities are engaged with creating social procurement policies, frameworks, implementing that. But the last 6 months, I've been really focused on the supply side, so social enterprises.
Okay, all right.
So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. As you may know, Bisocial Canada has a third-party certification for social enterprises, and we have a network of over 200 certified social enterprises from coast to coast. And this year, we worked on a survey and a report to kind of gather information, collect data, and do some research on what is the state of the social enterprise sector across Canada using our network as a snapshot. A couple of weeks ago, we released our report. I think I gave Yvonne the link, the Sell with Impact Stories and Research from the Canadian Social Enterprise Sector. And we had an event, and it was a really incredible, it was a 2-hour virtual event. We celebrated the findings from our research, and we spotlighted lots of stories from individuals that work at social enterprises, the successes that they have, challenges that the social enterprise faced. And we did a lot of kind of myth busting, which I think you'd enjoy, Peter. Kind of some high
What are
level
some of them that are worth busting?
that social enterprises are not a passing fad, that they're here to last. Some of the social enterprises in our network have been around for almost 50 years, and they're not all.
That's well beyond the average lifespan of an enterprise. Yeah.
So really incredible. They're not all located in metropolises like Toronto, Vancouver, or Winnipeg, even though obviously those are like really great hubs. They exist in rural communities or smaller cities, francophone areas in Ontario. United Church is so well connected with social enterprises too. I loved, Carmen, that you were speaking on that. One that really comes to mind, especially when we're talking about the use of underutilized church space. I don't know if you're familiar with the Raw Carrot. They're based in Paris, Ontario, and they have, I don't know if they're United Church, but I think they're Mennonite, and they have a few in Ontario where they wanted to address a problem that was existing in their areas, where just social exclusion, people with disabilities that were kind of being kept aside from society, and they didn't have an opportunity to develop their skills, or they were kind of stuck on welfare. So they thought, what can we do here to change this and help people in our communities? So they started making soup, and they used the kitchen space that are part of churches to make this soup. And they decided, oh, this is a great model. How can, do we care about the soup, or do we care about skills training and creating employment opportunities for these people that face barriers? So then they came up with a social franchise model. So they looked to other churches that have underutilized space, and how can we put that to work? How can we support other people in other communities? So that's just one great example. Another United Church, I think they've invested in Just Like Family Home Care, which is another social enterprise that does home care services for the senior population or people that need supports. And they have franchises all across Canada. And the United Church helped finance that, so they could do a social acquisition to buy a company that already exists and then move it across Canada. Kindred Housing Developer, they're part of the United Church. So they have, it must be billions of dollars worth of real estate across the country. And their plan is to develop a lot of affordable housing on sites adjacent to churches across Canada. So these are just incredible entrepreneurial ideas that are happening, that social enterprises are coming up with. And I think the research that we recently launched, it really hones in on that, spotlights case studies that social enterprises, they're businesses for good, and you have to be entrepreneurial to be in the marketplace. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are like a one-person show making donuts. Others have over 1,000 employees. So there's no kind of one size fits all. So maybe Peter, we can chat about doing webinars on myths and facts, debunking them for next year. But
sounds like a hoot. We can have a whole show.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what I'm fired up about right now. And I want to use the findings from our research to push and advocate for social enterprises at the federal level. One thing I've noticed is that a lot of social enterprises, they're very deeply, as they should be, entrenched in their communities, and just working away at what they do, it's hard for them to lift their head out of the sand and, be part of a conversation that spans the country. They might say, what does someone in St. John's have to do with someone in Vancouver Island? But I'd like to see Bisocial Canada as an intermediary speaking on behalf of the collective that are social enterprises. And we know there's tens of thousands across the country. Many social enterprises don't even know that they're a social enterprise. So promoting the awareness of that to the government at the federal level, because, talking about elections, what happens next year, the year after, if things change and they decide to cut funding, like that would be really detrimental to an entire ecosystem.
I was necessarily aware of what you were going to talk about coming in, and it struck me that going back to that conversation I had with David LePage a long time ago, he came to understand that what social enterprises needed was a market. And so there was a demand side problem. So Bisocial Canada then has advocated for the last 9 or 10 years to change the way larger anchor institutions purchase in order to create a market for such social enterprises. And I used to live in Peterborough, and Bisocial Canada has done some work there. And one of the concerns I had there was that, if these social procurement policies came into place, would there be a social enterprise ecology to respond? So is it the case that you're now coming back to social enterprise and looking to build some capacity to respond to the new market possibilities that the procurement work is bringing about? Is that how the economics of this works?
It's ongoing. So that's another thing that came up in our research. We asked social enterprises, what's the greatest challenge that they face? And access to markets was top of the list. So finding new customers. And in our research, it's social enterprises sell to everyone, like directly to consumers, business to business, business to government. But finding new customers seems to be the most challenging piece that social enterprises continue to have. Then it goes into access to financing, because it's very challenging for nonprofits and hybrid social enterprises to access traditional financing. Like, it's hard for them to start a business and even get a credit card if they're a nonprofit. Banks don't see them as like, oh, you're a nonprofit. How am I going to get my money back? Like, where does this go? So I think that's another thing we really need to focus on too, going to not just the Business Development Bank of Canada, but other investors, especially ones that are not just in the big cities. Like, we know there's a lot available in Toronto and in Vancouver, but what about these rural communities or other provinces that don't have access to these foundations? Where are they going to get funding from? And then the third biggest challenge was capacity. So we did a case study with Dave Rideout from Metro Works in Halifax, and they have 8 social enterprises. Their organization's been around for over 40 years. And I asked him, what's your key to success? And he was very funny. He said, perhaps it's being too stupid to say no was the key to success. But really what he wanted to hone in on was to be a successful social enterprise, you need to be entrepreneurial. You need to have good business acumen. You need to hire good people that know what you're doing. A lot of social enterprises, I think, come from more of a social background as opposed to the business background. And then they end up hiring outside consultants to support them, as opposed to fostering that wealth of knowledge inside their own business. So that was a huge key takeaway from the research that I still think about a lot as well. I didn't really answer your question, but
I don't remember what it was anymore. I'm kind of fixated on, Carmen, you used the phrase nonprofit. I know we use that, and you said, Niamh, you can't even get a credit card if you're nonprofit. I have friends in Europe, they call them social profits. And I think that's a phrase that you also used earlier, Carmen. Like, if we can see these organizations as social profits rather than nonprofit, why do you define it yourself according to something you're not?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd give you a credit card either.
Well, I think it perpetuates this idea that that it doesn't add value somehow, right? Like, we've come to a place in society where, like, shareholder profit has been like the primary value and the primary commitment of corporate culture. And so I think renaming that sector as social profit sector rather than the nonprofit sector or the charitable sector speaks to what it adds to Canada and what it adds to the world. Like, it's a massive, massive part of our economy, right? And massive cumulative employment to folks across the country, both people who are choosing to work in social profit sector because of their values, but also the types of training programs that, Niamh's contacts through Bisocial Canada and the folks that Sean's working with in Manitoba. Like, it's a huge driver of wellness in the country.
And Sean, you've said all the time, Sean, that nonprofits need to learn how to be more entrepreneurial, and the spaces that you're creating with Bisocial is. I was going to ask about that in terms of capacity with social enterprise. Say the city I'm in adopts social procurement. How is it for social enterprises to play in that space? Because I imagine that there's some capacity that needs to be built in order to be able to respond to some of those RFPs that'll come from a larger institution. How has that played out in the research that you found, the readiness of social enterprises to approach that new opportunity?
Yeah, we actually have a training program, Procurement for Social Value Suppliers, and it's all about getting people ready to respond to a request for proposal or request for quotation. We did it for a couple of years. It was funded by the federal government, and we still have it. It's interesting though, because every organization is different. Like, some social enterprises, like I said, are massive, and they have, maybe 1,000 employees. They might have a whole department that responds to RFXs.
Right.
They hire people that are already familiar with the procurement process. And then you might look at another business that might have 5 employees, and they're trying to respond to a contract, and they don't even know what an RFX is, like ABC. What are you talking about? So trying to break that down, and also trying to like find people that are in the right position.
So it's not a RFX isn't a RFP, formerly known as Twitter.
See, it's very confusing
Right.
to navigate this when you have no idea what's going on.
Right.
So maybe it's not always responding to a government proposal. Maybe it's, investing in a communications plan and paying for ads and going direct to consumers.
Right.
It really depends on what you sell and who your target audience is.
Right.
Peter,
you mentioned that out of the research. Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I'm just going to say, Peter, I feel the desperate need to let people know some of the past guests that we've had on that fit in so well to these two conversations. We've had Raven Indigenous Capital Partners telling us about their recent launch of a $50 million outcomes fund, where they're investing in social enterprises that are selling outcomes, such as reduced police dispatches or reduced energy poverty on First Nations. Very exciting. We've had Ryan from Tapestry Capital. They've already raised $100 million in community bonds for solar, and are now pushing into housing and some other areas. We've had Darcy Wood from Aki Energy that has now installed well over $25 million of ground source heat pumps on First Nations. Those are all significant social enterprises that have all started small. They all have a very small beginning. And I remind people to start in the beginning, not at the middle or the end. And I think that's important. We've also had Rob Fennell here just a couple of weeks ago talking about Camino Nova Scotia, which is theology in Halifax, getting into the tourism business of selling to people a week-long pilgrimage walking experience rather than going to Spain, connecting here. So
I thought he was going to be the one guest that didn't talk about economics, but you turned it into economics, Sean. Crying out loud.
Well, and I think that another connection with our two guests, Peter, is the indigenization in some ways of the economy, where we have elders that say, why is a nonprofit over here and then the mainstream economy over here? That the way we do things, those two things are together. And so here we are in Winnipeg, almost 20% Indigenous population. You're spending any time at all listening to this wisdom, you see that, these things should be together. And that's why, Bisocial Canada has been such a leader in promoting businesses that have a social purpose, Niamh. And I'm glad we understand that David is scaling back a bit, but he's been a huge mentor of ours, and the only guest we've had so far here in Axiom News that's been on twice already. So we definitely want to help.
He's used up all his spots then. No more room on that dance card we know all his moves. So could we get back to Niamh's the research? And you said that it sounded like what was burbling up for you as a result of that research was this idea of a bit of a party around Mythbusters. Is there anything else that the research is inspiring that you would like to see unfold next, or caught your eye?
What I guess my big takeaway from this research is it's not going to be a one and done thing. And I want this momentum to continue. I want to keep having these conversations. I want to keep promoting this. I would love for more social enterprises to join our network, so we have a greater voice to speak on behalf of. And then individuals, for years, everyone knows what buy green is, buy local is. I just want to put the hammer in the nail, buy social, never mind a business or a government. What can you as an individual do? At a local level, is there any social enterprises that you can be buying from? Thinking ahead, Christmas is coming up. Are you thinking of gifts? Can you buy from a social enterprise? On our website, there's a directory. A lot of them, there's a whole gift button where you can filter it. And a lot of those companies, they ship nationwide. So it's like,
I think that mug you were holding up earlier, I have one of those. I think it came to me full of chocolates from a social enterprise in Vancouver. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So it's like vote with your dollar, we're talking about how great social enterprises are and they want to grow their impact. Spend your money with them. Doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're a business, a government, a person. Like, are you buying a birthday present, a Christmas present? Are you buying donuts, coffee? There's probably a social enterprise coffee shop within an hour of wherever you live for the most part of the country. Can you go there instead of Tim Hortons or Starbucks? Not that there's anything wrong with Tim Hortons or Starbucks, but like, make these incremental changes and see what ripple effects the power of that purchase has on a community.
All right, I'll ask you one more question. It's another one that's just in the toolbox. If all that were to happen, what's the best thing that could happen? What would that make possible?
Like, our country is messed up. Climate change is... I live in BC.
Here.
The sky was full of smoke. I was lucky I didn't get evacuated, but many of my friends were. That's just BC. Never mind the flooding, the landslides, and that's just climate change. What about the people in the downtown east side of Vancouver that are living on the street people, or the people that are marginalized from society? Like, if we're bringing in 1.5 million new Canadians to Canada in the next 3 years, what about the current Canadians that are already here? Like, we need to take better care of each other. And I think social procurement and social enterprise is a key to that change. So I want more of a presence. I would love if people knew about social enterprise at a young age. And if anyone that does a business degree, that there's at least a module on social enterprise, so that people know that this is an opportunity. People don't know what a social enterprise is. They just incorporate or become a sole proprietor. There's different ways of doing business. So I guess that's my goal. How can we change the world? Get into the young people, teach them that you can do business in a better way, promote social enterprise.
Beautiful. I love it. And given what you've shared with us today, and even the research you've just done on social enterprise, the things, Carmen, that you've shared about what the United Church is involved in, and Sean, your recap of that was a tour de force of the social value marketplace structures of enterprise, procurement, and finance. And it's a real thing. But we're not paying enough attention to it. Well, there you go. I've walked us into what we're taking away from this. That's part of what I'm taking away is, Paris got 2 mentions today. Paris, Ontario. I don't know if you noticed that. So we'll have to see what's going on in Paris, Ontario. Maybe it's another star in the constellation somewhere in the vicinity of Winnipeg up there in the stars of the constellation. Carmen, Sean, Niamh, what meaning, if any, was made for you during our time together? You'll have to unmute your microphone. Yeah, got some fuzz on there, Sean. Just speak quickly, my friend.
Well, I was just going to say, go ahead, Carmen. But I excited to when we asked Carmen about what she's excited about, and these were all things about the church getting re-engaged with the community again. And I'm seeing this decline in membership as a gift in some ways that the church is beginning to embrace, and that was really exciting for me. I think the highlight of this 60 minutes for me this week.
All right, thank you, Sean. Carmen, a reflection or two?
Sure. I meant to mention about Kindred Works, so I'm glad that you did, Niamh. They actually just had groundbreaking on their first project that's gone to construction yesterday in Orillia, Ontario. And I'm moving to Toronto in a couple of years, and I'm hoping to move into one of their projects actually. But the other important part that as a takeaway from me, from Niamh, that relates to another piece of the flourishing project I'm doing in the church was around the capacity building and developing business acumen in the social profit sector. So I had thought, I'm going to 11 cities across the country to do this like Carmen Show flourishing conversations thing. And I should also be connecting with ministry personnel because everybody's feeling super crispy after COVID. I mean,
Super crispy.
Yeah.
That's gonna be my takeaway. Extra crispy.
But I thought, I should really be connecting with our ministry personnel as the spiritual leader of the church. And so I brought some folks together in Paris, Ontario for the
There are 3 mentions. Yep. We're looking for a guest from Paris, Ontario. So if anyone knows anyone who's creating the future we want to inhabit from Paris, Ontario, please do put them in touch with us.
And we were having this planning session about the public workshop, the church workshop. And I originally thought I would do a clergy retreat, just like a day and a half, like hang in with the moderator. Like, what do you need? Like, what, as your spiritual leader, what support can I give to you? And they were like, all due respect, moderator, we would spend a day and a half with you anywhere, anytime. But like, we need leadership development. We need business acumen. We need to know what skills you developed in your career before you were executive director at First United that allowed you to like affect an organizational turnaround and build a $90 million building in a 5-year period. Like, how did you do that? So we're going to, actually this week, we just selected 35 participants from across the church to be part of a 2-year leadership development program called Regenerate. And so that's exactly what we're doing in the church. So that kind of like was the other piece for me, is like the, cinching both the opportunity that's created by the declining membership in the church that Sean mentioned, and then this like capacity building that is really, really important in our sector.
All right. It sounds like Bisocial might have some offerings in that regard too. Niamh, a reflection or two. Sorry, Sean, did you have something?
No, I do want to jump in there and also say that I have a workshop out now through Church X. So churchx.ca.
What's with the X? RFX?
It's
Twitter X?
8-module introduction to social enterprises, and people can check that out as well. Over to you, Niamh.
Okay.
I guess it's kind of, when Carmen was speaking, I was thinking a lot about the transfer of knowledge. I think that's really kind of what's going on in my world. One, because David LePage is moving on to the next chapter of his life and going to be stepping back from Bisocial Canada. So the transfer of his knowledge to the Bisocial Canada team. And then 2, exactly what I said, educating others and telling them about social enterprise, and that, we can disrupt the status quo and set capitalism ablaze as we know it if we just do things differently.
You are a revolutionary. All right. Beautiful. Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll call our time closed. Thank you very much, Niamh, Carmen, and Sean. Sean, it's always it's a beauty working with you. I love your energy and the way you just keep driving and getting the difficult things done. So it's always a pleasure to be in your company and to be with both of you, Niamh and Carmen. All 3 of you are definitely building the world of the future, and the one that we'd love to live into and inhabit. So thank you for your work in the world, and hopefully we can have you back to keep track of all those beautiful unfoldings. All right, with that, we'll call our time closed. Next week, we will be joined by Angela Fell, and Angela is a co-founder of Northern Heart and Soul, and co-director and founder, I believe, of the Neighborhood Democracy Movement. She is definitely a force of nature for all things neighborhood democracy. And Shirish Kulkarni, who is an award-winning journalist, researcher, and community organizer that I've come to know over the last year or so. And he is promoting a brand of journalism he calls reflective journalism. And he's a wonderful person to be with. Shirish and Angela are known to each other, so that should be yet another wonderful conversation here at Axiom News Live. So you can follow us, subscribe below, or find us at axiomnews.com on X and on Facebook and anywhere else. I think that's it. With that, I'm your host, Peter Pula. Thanks for listening.